It was nearly midnight in Manhattan. Rain drizzled down, misting the sidewalks with silver as yellow taxis zipped past blurred neon lights. Inside a modest, almost forgotten diner wedged between towering office buildings, the world slowed down. Only 3 customers remained. One of them sat quietly in the corner booth, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than the waitress's monthly rent. No one recognized him, but they would have if they'd looked closer. He wasn't the kind of man who needed introductions. Edward Callahan, billionaire, CEO. The kind of name whispered in boardrooms and featured on magazine covers. Tonight, though, he was alone. No security, no press. Just a man nursing a black coffee. Across the room, a young woman in her early 30s worked behind the counter, wiping it down with tired hands. Her uniform was faded, her hair in a hurried ponytail, and her shoes looked like they'd walked too many miles. Her name tag read Maya. She moved quickly but gently, checking on the few lingering guests with a warm, practiced smile that masked exhaustion. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled. A small figure entered, soaked from the rain, his white cane tapping cautiously on the floor. Maya's face lit up. She ran toward the boy, kneeling to dry him with a towel she pulled from under the counter. "You walked here?" Again, she asked softly. The boy, maybe 9 or 10, nodded. His eyes, though unfocused, sparkled. "I wanted to surprise you, Mama." She laughed quietly and hugged him tightly. Edward watched, his fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. Maya led the boy to a booth near the kitchen and disappeared behind the counter. A few minutes later, she returned with a bowl of tomato soup, a grilled cheese sandwich, and a cup of warm milk. She placed them gently in front of him. "Eat slowly, sweetheart." "It's hot," she whispered. "I know," he smiled. "I can smell it." Edward's eyes didn't leave the two of them. He asked for a refill he didn't need just to keep watching. Something about the boy, how careful he was, how grateful, and the woman, how lovingly she served him, how she didn't eat anything herself, kept tugging at something deep in him. After an hour, the boy finished his meal and rested his head on the table, content. Maya covered him with her apron like a blanket and returned to cleaning. Her manager, a grumpy man in his 50s, emerged from the back, his face hardening as he saw the boy. Again, he hissed under his breath. "You can't keep bringing your kid here, Maya. It's not a daycare." "He just came in to see me," she replied. "He won't be any trouble." "You said that last time." "I'm warning you. One more incident and you're gone." Edward's gaze sharpened. Maya's shoulders tensed, but she nodded and kept working. After the manager stormed off, Edward stood, placing a $100 bill on the table without touching his untouched coffee. As he walked toward the door, he paused. "Nice kid," he said, his voice smooth, calculated. Maya nodded with a polite smile. "Thank you, sir." Outside, he stood in the rain for a moment, watching his reflection in the diner window. He'd seen thousands of employees, ambitious, polished, desperate for a chance. But none of them moved him like the woman who just gave her only meal to her blind son without hesitation. He lit a cigarette, inhaled once, and crushed it under his heel. The next night, he returned. Maya blinked in surprise when he walked in, but said nothing. He ordered the same coffee, sat in the same booth. She served him and went back to work. Hours passed. He waited. At exactly 11:50 p.m., the doorbell jingled again. The boy entered, drenched from the rain again, and Maya rushed to him. Edward watched the same dance unfold, her drying him, feeding him, tucking him in with her apron. This time, Edward waited until the diner emptied completely. When Maya wiped down his table, he looked at her closely. "Do you always work this late?" he asked. "Every night," she said without hesitation. "And your son, does he come every night?" She hesitated. "He says he wants to, but I told him not to. It's not safe. He sneaks out sometimes. He's stubborn." "He's blind," Edward said slowly. "He walks here, alone, in the rain." She nodded and looked down. "He's careful. He counts the steps." Edward leaned in. "What's his name?" "Leo." He nodded, then stood and walked out without saying another word. That night, he didn't go back to his penthouse. Instead, he sat in his car across from the diner until the lights turned off and Maya walked out carrying Leo, wrapped in her jacket. She waited at the bus stop, and when it came, she stepped on with him fast asleep on her shoulder. Over the next week, Edward came every night. Same booth, same coffee, same routine. But each night, he left a different amount, $100, $500, one time even $1,000. She never questioned it, never even looked at the money. She just collected it, tucked it into the register, and focused on her work. Then, on the seventh night, something changed. Leo didn't come. Maya stared at the door every 5 minutes, checked her phone. Nothing. By midnight, she couldn't hide her panic. She asked the cook to cover for her and ran outside, eyes darting through the rain. Edward stood and followed her without hesitation. "Where would he go?" he asked, grabbing an umbrella from his car. I don't know," she gasped. "He has her out. He knows the path. But he's never this late. Never." "Let's retrace it," Edward said. Together, they drove down the streets Leo might have walked. After 20 minutes, Maya screamed and pointed. There! Leo was sitting under a bus stop bench, holding his cane tightly. His face was pale, lips trembling. Maya jumped out and ran to him. "I tripped," he whispered. "I got turned around. I couldn't tell where I was." She held him so tightly he winced. Edward crouched beside them and wrapped his coat around the boy. "We'll get you warm, buddy," he said softly. Back at the diner, Edward made a call. "I want a full-time driver and a private tutor. Background checked." Immediately, he hung up before anyone could ask questions. Maya sat beside Leo in the back booth, trying to calm her nerves. Edward returned with 2 hot chocolates and placed them down. "I can help," he said. "Let me." She looked at him, eyes glassy. "Why? Why would you do that?" He leaned forward, his tone unreadable. "Because years ago, someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. And I've been repaying the universe ever since." That was the last night Edward let Leo walk to the diner. The next evening, a black car pulled up outside Maya's apartment. A woman in a sharp suit greeted her with a smile. "I'm Clara. Mr. Callahan arranged for me to tutor Leo, with your permission." Maya was speechless. Leo beamed. A tutor. Weeks passed. Edward never missed a visit. The diner became their strange meeting ground, coffee for him, hope for her, and stories for Leo. One day, Edward brought a large envelope. He slid it across the counter. "What's this?" Maya asked. "Open it." Inside was a letter of acceptance from the Braille Institute. A full scholarship for Leo. Housing, care, education. Tears spilled from her eyes. We can't afford this." "You don't have to," he interrupted. "It's taken care of." She stood frozen, unable to speak. Then Leo's voice broke the silence. "Does that mean I can learn to read, Mama?" Her hands trembled as she nodded. Leo left for the Institute the following month. Maya stood on the platform, waving goodbye as the train pulled away. Edward stood beside her, hands in his pockets, silent. Then one day, Maya stopped showing up at the diner. Edward came. Waited. No Maya. The next day, same thing. On the third night, he asked the manager, but the man shrugged. She quit. Said she had an opportunity she couldn't refuse. Edward narrowed his eyes. Something felt wrong. He spent days searching, only to find that Maya had vanished. Her apartment was empty. No forwarding address. No phone calls. No messages. She was gone. Weeks passed. Then months. Then one morning, a small envelope appeared on Edward's desk. No return address. Just his name in neat handwriting. Inside was a photo. Maya, standing in front of a small cafe. Not a diner. Her own place. Maya's corner. And beneath the photo, a handwritten note. "I didn't disappear. I found myself. Because of you. Come visit sometime. There's always a seat at the corner table." Edward stared at the note for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the elevator, already dialing his driver. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He never needed to. Not when there was one story still unfinished. And the most important chapter was yet to be written. The black car rolled to a smooth stop in front of a quiet street on the edge of a small coastal town, far from the towering glass buildings and endless traffic of New York. It was a kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where neighbors knew each other's names, and where strangers still waved hello. Edward stepped out of the vehicle, the ocean breeze brushing through his perfectly tailored coat. In his hand was the photo Maya had sent, creased now at the corners, but cherished like a sacred token. Across the street, there it was, Maya's corner. A little cafe painted in warm beige and soft blue, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, with the smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee spilling onto the pavement. The bell above the cafe door jingled as he stepped inside. The place was modest, but every detail spoke of care and intention. The shelves lined with homemade jams, the handwritten chalkboard menu, the sunlight that poured through linen curtains. At first, no one recognized him, and he preferred it that way. He stood in silence near the counter, listening. In the back, a familiar voice called out warm and commanding, "Table 3 wants the walnut pie, and we're out of rye, so substitute the multigrain." Then she emerged, Maya, no longer wearing a faded uniform and tired eyes. She wore a soft yellow dress, a clean apron with the cafe's logo, and a quiet fire in her eyes. She moved with confidence, laughter in her voice as she chatted with a couple near the counter. She looked radiant, someone who'd rebuilt herself from the ashes of hardship. And yet, when her eyes landed on him, everything froze. There was a long pause before a smile slowly curved her lips. She walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You came," she said, her voice hushed, almost unbelieving. "You invited me," he replied, equally quiet. She gestured to the far corner table, the one with a clear view of the whole cafe. "That seat's been waiting for you." He sat. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking how he liked it. Somehow, she remembered. He sipped it and gave a small nod. She sat across from him, folding her hands, searching his face. "I didn't want to disappear," she began, her voice low. "But I had to go. I had to do something for myself and for Leo." Edward didn't interrupt. He just watched her, listening in the way only someone truly invested does. "After he left for the institute," she continued, "I stayed in the apartment for a while. But it felt hollow. I had a little money, saved, thanks to you really. And one day, I saw a listing for this cafe. It was old, nearly abandoned, but cheap. Something just told me, this was it. This was where I could finally start again. On my terms." She looked at him, and he noticed how her eyes no longer held the weight of despair. They held hope. "And Leo?" he asked. "He's thriving," she said, her smile widening. "He calls every day. He's reading Braille faster than some of the older kids. He plays piano now. Says he wants to compose music one day. He's even talking about helping kids like him someday. Says he wants to teach them how to see with their hearts." Edward stared down into his coffee, the steam rising between them like memory. "I missed you too," he said after a moment. "Every night I came to the diner after you left, just waiting, hoping you'd walk in." "I couldn't stay in that life," Maya replied gently. "But I never forgot you. How could I?" They sat in silence for a while, the cafe buzzing gently around them. Then Maya leaned in, her tone soft but serious. "Why did you keep coming to the diner, Edward? Why us? Why me?" He exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down. "Because once a long time ago I was a boy like Leo. Not blind, but lost. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father left. I used to sit under the booth at a restaurant while she cleaned floors. She gave up everything for me. And when I made my first million, I bought that restaurant and turned it into something better. But I never forgot the feeling of watching her give without ever receiving. When I saw you, when I saw Leo, it felt like watching a memory come alive." Maya reached across the table, placing her hand gently on his. "You gave us more than money, Edward. You gave us a chance. A real chance." He looked up at her, and for the first time in years, his voice faltered. "And I didn't do it expecting anything back. But I hoped one day, maybe I'd be part of your story again." She smiled. "Maybe you are." They spent hours talking about Leo, about business, about life. Maya told him how she learned to bake from her grandmother and how she now wakes up at 4 a.m. to knead dough. She showed him the storage room she turned into a small office for Leo when he visits. She talked about the community she'd built, about how she hires single mothers and young people from the neighborhood. Edward listened, moved in a way he hadn't felt in years. Just as he was about to leave, the door burst open. A teenage boy, with dark curly hair and a bright white cane, stepped inside. "Mama," he called out, grinning wide. Maya gasped. Leo. He had grown, taller, stronger, but his smile was the same. She ran to him, and he wrapped his arms around her. "I got the weekend off." "Surprise," he laughed. Then he paused, his head turning slightly. Is Mr. Callahan here?" Edward stood slowly, heart swelling. "I'm here, Leo." The boy smiled and walked toward him confidently. "I've been waiting to say thank you. Really thank you. I'm learning so much. And I want to make you proud." "You already have," Edward said, his voice thick. Leo hugged him, and it was then that Edward realized something. Something he hadn't admitted even to himself. He didn't just want to support them. He wanted to belong to them. They spent the weekend together, Edward, Maya, and Leo. They ate breakfast at the cafe, walked along the beach, and listened to Leo play a melody he'd composed himself. It was haunting, beautiful, full of warmth and longing. Edward stood by the old piano in Maya's tiny living room, his hand resting on Leo's shoulder. "I want to help you make that into something real," he said. "Record it. Share it with the world." Leo's eyes lit up. "You mean it?" Edward nodded. "Music is emotion. And you have so much to give." That night, after Leo had gone to bed, Edward sat with Maya on the porch. The stars above the coastal town were clear, something rare in the city. He turned to her, searching her face. "I want to be part of your life," he said simply. "Not as a billionaire, just as a man who wants to matter to someone." Maya looked at him for a long time. "You already matter to us, Edward. But I need to ask, are you ready to stop running from your own story? To stop hiding behind work and numbers and finally let someone in?" He didn't answer with words. He just reached out and held her hand. The following months unfolded like a dream. Edward began spending more time at the coast. His business partners questioned his absence, but his company never slowed. He'd built it to function without him. What mattered now was Leo's music, Maya's cafe, and a small family he never expected to find. He built a recording studio near the town, hired the best engineers, and let Leo experiment. The boys' compositions began to spread online, first as whispers, then as waves. People didn't just hear the notes. They felt the story behind them. But peace is never permanent. One evening, while Edward was closing up the cafe with Maya, his phone buzzed. A call from his boardroom attorney. He ignored it. Then another. Then a third. Finally, he answered. And his face changed. "They're threatening a takeover," he said quietly. "Investors think I'm distracted. They want to replace me." Maya placed a hand on his arm. "You've built more than a company, Edward. You've built a legacy. They can't take that away. But they can tear it down." He flew back to the city the next day. Reporters were already waiting at the airport, asking why the mogul had vanished, who the mysterious cafe woman was, and what it all meant. But Edward didn't answer. He went straight into the boardroom and looked every investor in the eye. "I stepped away for something more important than quarterly profits. And I won't apologize for that." They tried to vote him out. He reminded them of who built the empire they stood in. When they questioned his judgment, he showed them Leo's music, played it loud in the conference room, unapologetically. "You want to chase numbers," he said, "but I've found meaning. And if you can't see the difference, then go ahead, vote. But understand this, I won't fight to stay. I'll start something new. And you will lose." There was no vote. He returned to the coast 3 days later. Maya was waiting outside the cafe, arms folded, pretending not to be worried. "I still have the company," he said. "But I'm handing over most of it." Stepping back. She nodded. "Good. Because we need help repainting the cafe walls this weekend." He laughed for the first time in days. Years later, people would speak of Maya's Corner as more than a cafe. It became a place where lost souls found purpose, where a blind boy became a musical prodigy, and where a billionaire remembered how to feel. And behind it all, at the corner table, sat the man who'd once walked in for coffee and found a family instead. Time moved on, as it always does, not loudly, but like the turning of pages in a book whose ending is both inevitable and unknown. Edward had become a part of Maya and Leo's lives in a way that felt natural, unforced, like a missing puzzle piece sliding into place after years of not knowing it was even missing. Maya's corner expanded, not into a franchise, but into a movement. Local artists played there every weekend. Single mothers found employment and dignity in its kitchen, and every child who walked through its doors was greeted with warm bread and warmer smiles. Yet, for all the peace that had settled into their lives, one could sense that life was still quietly crafting its next test. After all, joy and struggle often walk the same path. It was on a golden autumn evening when Leo first began to complain of the headaches. They weren't the normal kind, the fleeting pressure or throb that could be dismissed with water and rest. These were deep, persistent, and accompanied by moments of disorientation. The first time he collapsed during a piano recital, it was written off as exhaustion. He'd been rehearsing nonstop. The second time, when he stood frozen in the middle of his own song, unable to recognize where he was or what he was playing, Maya took him to the doctor without delay. What followed were weeks of scans, blood tests, evaluations. Maya and Edward sat side by side in a white room, their fingers tightly laced, as the neurologist entered with a solemn expression that erased hope before he spoke a single word. "There's a tumor," the doctor said quietly, placing a scan on the light board. "Inoperable. It's deep in the brain stem. The good news is it's benign, but it's pressing on essential nerves. That's likely what's causing the episodes." Maya didn't move. Her breath caught in her chest. Edward stared ahead, jaw locked, willing himself not to collapse under the weight of old fears made new again. "What does that mean?" Maya finally whispered. "Can we treat it? Is there a plan?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "There are treatments, radiation, possibly newer methods we're trialing. But we have to act quickly. It's not about saving his life, it's about preserving his quality of life." Leo never cried. When Maya told him, he simply tilted his head and said, "Will it take my music away?" The question shattered something deep inside Edward. They assured him they would do everything to prevent that. But promises felt hollow in the face of so much uncertainty. Edward began making calls, pulling strings no one else could reach. He connected with a neuro-oncology center in Switzerland known for its pioneering approach. The problem was not money. It never had been, it was time. Every hour mattered. Maya was hesitant at first, not wanting to drag Leo across the world, away from the life he loved. But Leo surprised them both. "If it means I can keep playing," he said, touching the edge of the piano at Maya's corner, "I'll go." So they flew. The clinic was nestled in the Alps, a place that seemed too beautiful to house such suffering. Days turned into weeks. Treatments were intense, targeted beams, clinical drugs not yet approved elsewhere, daily physical therapy. Edward never left Leo's side. He read him books late into the night, sometimes financial journals, sometimes poetry. Maya would hum softly while combing his hair, pretending not to cry when Leo fell asleep mid-sentence. One morning, months into the treatment, Leo sat up straighter than he had in days. His skin was pale, his frame thinner, but his spirit, his spark, was intact. "Play something," he said to Edward. Edward raised an eyebrow. "You want me to play?" Leo smiled. "You can't be around music this long and not learn something." Edward laughed nervously. He hadn't touched a piano in decades. But for Leo he would. His fingers fumbled, stumbled, and tripped over the keys. Maya laughed. Leo joined in. But then Edward played something accidental, yet familiar. A soft set of chords Leo had once written. "That's it," Leo whispered. "That's the first song I wrote. You remembered." They played it together. Edward slowly tapping the bass, Leo guiding the melody with his voice alone, humming when his fingers grew too tired. It was the last time they played that piece together. The treatments worked, at first. Leo's episodes lessened, his speech returned to normal, and he began composing again using voice dictation. He sent out a new track called Blind Light, a haunting instrumental piece that combined piano with subtle electronic layers. It went viral almost overnight. News outlets called him a prodigy, a miracle. Interview requests flooded in. But fame was never his goal. "I just want to leave something behind," he told Maya one night. "In case, you know." She hushed him, holding him close. "You'll be here for a long time." But deep down, she knew Leo had always been wise beyond his years, wise enough to understand his own story, even if others couldn't accept it. In the spring, Edward flew back briefly to New York to handle business. When he returned, the clinic was quieter. Nurses were gentler in their words. Maya's face carried a weight he hadn't seen before. She took his hands in hers and said, "He asked for you." Edward stepped into the room. Leo was lying on the bed, tubes around him, but smiling. His eyes, sightless yet always searching, seemed to sense Edward's presence before he spoke. "Did you know," Leo began softly, "that blind people can see in dreams?" Edward nodded, sitting beside him. "I see you in my dreams," Leo continued. "Not in suits. Not with business stuff. Just you, laughing. And Mama's always baking. And the cafe is full. And music is always playing." Edward blinked away the sting behind his eyes. "Did I make you proud?" Leo asked. "You made the world proud," Edward whispered. "You made me more than I ever thought I could be." Leo reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Tell my story," he said. "Not just the sad parts. The whole thing. The magic too. People need to know what it means to see without eyes." That night, Leo slipped into a deep sleep. Peaceful. Quiet. He didn't wake again. The funeral was held at the edge of the sea. Hundreds came, musicians, fans, children from the Institute, strangers who had only known Leo through a melody or a lyric. Maya didn't speak. She couldn't. But Edward did. He stood before the crowd, holding Leo's white cane like a torch. "There was once a boy," he began, voice shaking, "who taught me how to live. He couldn't see, but he noticed everything. He heard things we missed, felt things we ignored. He saw people, truly saw them. And he left us not with silence, but with a song." He stepped aside, and the speakers played Blind Light. It filled the sky. In the months that followed, Edward sold off most of his business empire. He kept just one investment, a foundation he created in Leo's name. It funded music schools for blind and disabled children. Maya's Corner expanded into a second location, this time named Leo's Light. It became more than a cafe. It became a sanctuary. Maya, stronger than ever, continued baking, mentoring, loving. Her grief didn't break her. It transformed her. She spoke at schools, held music nights, taught parents how to love without fear. She lived for Leo. Edward stayed in the town, in the house overlooking the sea. Every morning, he walked to the cafe, not as a billionaire or benefactor, but as family. Sometimes, late at night, he'd sit at the piano in the back of Maya's Corner. And though the seat beside him was empty, he swore he could hear Leo humming along, keeping time with invisible fingers. They never married. They never needed to. What they had was deeper, roots that wrapped around pain and joy, around loss and healing. Love in its purest form, untouched by labels. Years later, a journalist asked Edward during a rare interview, "If you could trade your entire fortune for one moment in your life, what would it be?" Edward didn't hesitate. "The first time I saw a waitress feeding her blind son. I didn't know then, but I just witnessed my entire life changing." The world remembered Leo not for how he died, but for how he lived. His music played in hospitals, classrooms, weddings, and funerals. Blind Light became an anthem of resilience. And Maya? She never stopped feeding the world, with food, with warmth, and with the quiet kind of strength that comes only from knowing the deepest kind of love and the deepest kind of loss. So in the end, it wasn't a billionaire who changed a waitress's life. It was a blind boy's spirit that changed them both, and through them, the world.